everybody. This is James Diboe, Discovering, dedicated to original peoples as always. And we got a special guest on. He's been on before. This is actually the trilogy. Robin Walker, great historian. How you doing, my brother?
Life is really, really good, sir.
Good, good. Well, this is like season 1, episode 5, dealing with the Black presence in Europe. Very interesting, anticipated this discussion. And he's also just come back from Ethiopia, which we'll deal with a part 2 in another time. Now, Robin, where do we begin with the Black presence of Europe? I'm sure, obviously, way pre-slavery, what most people know.
If we wanted to go back early enough, the very, very first humans that have been dug up in Europe, modern humans, were actually humans that had African or Australian Aborigine-like appearances. And therefore, the very, very first Europeans, if we go back far enough, would have been of recent African heritage.
Right, okay. So now, like people like, I study a lot of people like Jay Rogers, Sheikh Anta Diop, and Renaud Rashidi. They always spoke about the African presence, Black presence around the world. Now, with Europe, it's not too familiar with today. Now, in Asia, you can still see pockets of these populations that are still there from 45 years ago. I've witnessed them myself. Now, when we're dealing with Europe now, like studying, like example, about the Colchians, by the Black Sea area, Caspian Sea. These Kushites or Nubian Egyptian stock, the time of the Colchians?
They could have been. Certainly, the ancient European historian Herodotus was of the opinion that the Colchians came from ancient Egypt. And he gives his reasons for his speculation that they came from ancient Egypt. And so he could be right. Certainly, the view that the Colchians were ancient Egyptians who had, become a part of the population of what is today southern Russia. Certainly, that was his opinion.
Right, okay. Now, when we're dealing with ancient Greece now, we have different things. Like some people speak on the ancient Greeks were Black people. Some people say that they wasn't Black people. Some people see them as mixed people. So when we're dealing with this Indo-European migration, because they seem to be everywhere at once. I'm going to say everywhere. I mean, you hear about them in India, going into India 1500 BC. You hear about them Jordan, around the Altar Mountains, Siberia areas, and now, when was the time where you say the ancient Greeks became, well, when we say white, not so much white, but the appearance that they are now, the ancient Greeks, was Greece going back maybe 5,000 years ago as Black peoples? The same with the Romans, would you say?
Yeah, but the question I'm asking is, did the Greeks even exist 5,000 years ago?
That's true.
My evidence says the beginnings of the ancient Greeks is about 2,750 BC years ago, which is about 750 BC.
Yeah.
Right. Ancient Greece starts with people like the great writer of the Odyssey and the Iliad. So we're talking about people like Homer. So that's the beginnings of the ancient Greek culture.
Yeah.
Now, before there was a Greece, there used to be a civilization in Crete, and the Cretans, they call this culture Minoan Crete.
Yeah.
And there is some speculation that the Cretans could have come from Africa.
Yeah.
And the speculation came from the archaeologist that excavated it, Sir Arthur Evans, and he was asked his opinions, and he said, it looks to me that these are an African people. Right. And then that resulted in a back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. With the Greeks, though, 750 BC, I think, is the oldest date that I've seen.
Okay. Now, the same with the Romans, well, before it was Rome, even the Etruscans, I'm aware of them. I mean, isn't there any agreement on, like, to say, like, well, the geographical area we know is Greece and Rome. Would you say, is there enough evidence there to say, like, these were black peoples that were there, or African peoples in the last couple of thousand years before the arrival of the Indo-Europeans? Or is it it's not as simple as that, is it? Because different people have been coming in at different times, would you say?
Simple answer is I personally don't know. There is a book coming out of Pomegranate Press where they talk about the origins of the people of Etrusca. And they make it clear that the Etruscans were definitely an Africoid population, but I don't know enough to speak intelligently on it. And then when we're coming with the Greeks, same thing. I don't know enough to speak intelligently. I do know this. If you read Greek and Roman accounts, as I have, where they're talking about the different peoples of the world, they divide the peoples into three. The Northern Europeans, they call them Scythians, and they describe them as white with blonde or ginger hair. Africans or Ethiopians, and they describe themselves as in between. And that's very, very important.
Yeah.
Because that would make them very different to how they're presented in the American epics.
Yeah.
They make it clear that they are in between. As they call it, I'm quoting, a blending of both elements. That's the description I've seen.
Now, some people, the reference about where they believe that the Indo-Europeans came from. Now, we know originally, obviously, everyone came from Africa. Now, some people describe them as coming from Central Asia. Some people describe them coming from the Caucasus Mountains. And then some people believe that they just, the appearance changed in Northern Europe, Scandinavia areas and these places. But from what you've looked at, where do you find the location of the European, obviously after these left Africa, before migrating deeply into Europe?
Because we don't really have documents, all we've got is speculation.
Yeah.
And so the speculation, I've seen people advance the Caucasus Mountains theory. I've seen people come with Central Asia. I've seen people come with Central Europe.
Yeah.
And in every case, because we're dealing with people that don't have written records, we're in the realm of speculation. So I personally don't know.
Right. So going back to ancient Britain, when we're dealing with the time of Stonehenge. Now, we know before that we had Cheddar Man about 10,000 years ago, Cheddar Man, and you can see the appearance. He's a black person, blue eyes, but definitely a melanated person. So when we get into Stonehenge now, do you make is there any like anthropology or any archaeology that says who these people were during the time of Stonehenge?
No, there isn't. This is what there is. The problem is Cheddar Man's people, we can't prove continuity from 10,000 years ago all the way down to 5,000 years ago, 3000 BP. If we can show continuity, then we can say Cheddar Man's people were the people that built Stonehenge.
Right.
Now, there was a movement of people from the Middle East into Britain, and those people, some people call them the Beaker folks. And what's really interesting is where they are said to have come from, including places like Turkey and so on. And I don't know if you've followed the news stories that there was a very famous Turkish remain of a human, and he was shown to be dark-skinned. And that story broke about 1 year ago. I don't know if you followed that story.
I don't think I kept up with that one, but you can tell me about it.
But the significance of it is that Turkish remain would be the same ethnicity as the Beaker folks.
Okay.
And that's radical. Now, most people obviously didn't put two and two together because it was just reported as a separate story. But that would be representative of the Beaker folk. So again, I'd like to see a lot more evidence to cement the argument. But it does mean that in the history of who built Stonehenge, we could be in that story. and it's a story that it's worth looking at to see whether or not we can prove the case. But for those of you following this, it's a Turkish mummified remain. It wasn't deliberately mummified, but I think nature mummified a particular body. And the evidence was found a year ago that the individual was dark-skinned.
And what year was, how old is this remains? Would you say, did they give a date, the carbon data?
They did, but I can't remember what the date was.
Right.
It was something like 4, 5, 6,000 years old, something like that.
Yeah, going back, yeah. So funny I mentioned Turkey, originally Anatolia. Now, you know, a lot of the people from Central Asia entered Anatolia, and, you know, from then it's Turkey, isn't it? Now, do you think like the original Turks before the time of the people from Central Asia, the Turkic people, entered into these areas, would you Turkish people probably would be more darker skinned, or would you see, well, that's not early enough? Whereas we had the Greeks, we had the Romans, they would all move around these places.
Here's the thing. Everybody would have been darker skinned unless we have evidence to the contrary.
Yeah.
Do you see? So what it is then is until we get the emergence of light-skinned populations, and scholars have found the 2 genes responsible for skin lightening, everybody everywhere would have been dark-skinned unless we have evidence to the contrary.
Right.
Oh, by the way, I found the article. A new study reveals surprising secrets about Otzi, the Iceman, a 5,000-year-old mummy, the oldest naturally mummified body ever discovered, continues to stun scientists.
Wow.
And updated DNA testing on the 5,000-year-old Otzi, the Iceman mummy, reveals fresh clues about his ancestry. The new find shows that he was an Anatolian farmer and likely had an increased risk of obesity. Otzi the Iceman also had darker hair and skin than originally believed.
Right. See.
Right.
Yeah. So basically,
and the significance of that is that population is the same population that is believed to have created the Beaker folks. And the Beaker folks are the people that are supposedly the people that came into Britain and were responsible for our Stonehenge.
Okay. Now, later on, obviously, I'm aware of different other people's, like the Phoenicians, they supposed to came to Britain. I think, what's a particular place? Cornwall.
Cornwall.
Yeah, that's it.
Where they opened tin mines.
That's right, yeah, the Phoenicians. Now,
can
you also, I remember there was an article about, he said King Tut shared DNA with man in Europe, people in Europe. Now, with this, I'm assuming this would have been them going into Europe, obviously, well, going into Britain. Because sometimes the narrative they might give is that it might have been the opposite way around.
Do
you know what I mean? So, like, so the African presence in them has always been, it sounds like there's people who are not aware of the African presence. It just sounds like that Africans, once he left Africa, that was it then until they were captured into slavery by whether it was the Arabs or Europeans, and they were brought to different places in the world, never speaking on as independently, migrating, whether navigation, moving into different places. Now, I'm aware of Spain as well. I think we spoke about this last time. The Romans, in their accounts when they came to Britain, seeing 2 different peoples, 2 different races, a redhead race, like you mentioned before, and a brown-black race with curly hair, more like looking like an Aboriginal Australian type. Now, with this, when we say Spain, the possibility came from, would you say Spain would have been an area where, like you said, everyone was darker skinned back in going a couple of 6,000, 5,000 years ago? So would this be a population in the Mediterranean where we've got Greece, what we know as Greece, Spain, Portugal, Turkey, very similar people in these areas in Southern Europe?
It's quite possible, and Otzi the Iceman becomes powerful evidence. Do you see? Okay, now, in the case of Spain, the account where someone is describing what was going on in Britain and said that there was two populations, one light, one dark. That same source speculates that the dark population came from Spain.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, that speculation that they came from Spain means that at the time that the Romans said that, the people in Spain would have been predominantly dark-skinned. Do you see?
All right. Yeah.
But there's also another black presence in Spain that needs to be pointed out. And there is a medieval book called Chronica General. And the medieval book is a Spanish book. And in that book, we have an account of Pharaoh Taharqa. And Taharqa is the ruler of Kush, conquering Spain. Yeah. And what happened was I was able to find the information in a Spanish book. And what then happened was one of my friends translated the old Spanish into English. And yeah, so I do have a translation of what the Spanish is alleged to have said. So what we have then is during the time period, around about 690-ish BC, there was definitely a period where the people of Sudan conquered into Spain. And so there was a black presence then, not an indigenous presence, but a conquering presence from Sudan. And this is something that was then documented in Spanish medieval history, where they're talking about the ancient period of Spain. Do you see?
Yeah. So that's what I mean. So Africans have always, I don't even think you can give a time period of like when in the last, say, 5,000, 10,000 years of to say, well, Africans wasn't aware how to get into this Mediterranean area. I mean, all these surrounding islands, I mean, you could call Crete African island. You know, I'm sure we could call Tenerife an African island, you know, if you look at it geographically.
You're right, right. And that's what the historians say. So in the case of Sir Arthur Evans, he's definitely classifies Crete in that way.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we've got the fact that the first known European was from Romania and 40,000 years old. And the reconstruction was done by Alice Roberts, the BBC program. You know, the BBC did a series called The Incredible Human Journey.
Yeah, was it in
one of them.
Was it in different episodes?
That's right. And the one on Europe suggested that the very first person in Europe was 40,000 years old.
Yeah.
And let me read what they've said. The earliest Europeans were much darker skinned than later Europeans, having only just arrived from more tropical places.
Yeah.
Is what they say. And then we also have a reconstruction of the first Russian. The skeleton is called Kostenki 14. And the reconstruction is 36,000 years. And it shows Australian Aborigine features. You've then got Cheddar Man, you already know about. I have a news article that says, first Irish population had dark skin similar to Cheddar Man, DNA research suggests. I have an article from Sweden, documentary about dark skinned first Swedes, sparks horror on Twitter.
Yes, Sweden.
Right.
Interesting.
So yeah, so when it comes to the presence of black people in very early Europe, the data is there.
Yeah, interesting. So you know when we deal with the ice age, I think on the first discussion I spoke to you about this, and of course you were speaking about different times. Maybe in the last 6,000 years it went to where the appearance of actual white skin came in. Now the ice age is, you know, do you take anything from it or challenge it in any way of the time it started and the time it ended? Does it seem anything does it seem correct in any way or incorrect with the dates?
Let me answer that. let me answer that. With our scholarship, we were following in the footsteps of Professor Sheikh Anta Diop and
Yeah,
Professor Charles Finch. And
yeah,
both of them were of the opinion that Europeans evolved in the Ice Age. And that opinion shaped Black scholarship right up until relatively recently. However, the new scholarship, with the discovery of certain genes responsible for skin lightening, and one of these genes appearing in human society 9,000 years ago, another one appearing 8,000 years ago. We now know that light skin did not evolve in the Ice Age. It came after the Ice Age.
after the
And
ice.
therefore,
Mm.
yeah, so therefore the importance that Black scholars used to give the Ice Age is probably wrong. Do you see?
Yeah, yeah, just following the old model they were doing. That's great. It's been
Yeah.
updated. Definitely needs updating. Yeah. So I'm aware of like also like you know at the time of Hannibal. So we're dealing with Hannibal,
Yeah.
the Carthaginians.
Yeah.
Now many people say different things like Hannibal weren't black, Hannibal was black, and or you might say he was a mixture of the Phoenicians that came in and they mixed with the local black populations of Tunisia, these
Yeah.
areas.
But even if that did happen, he was still black.
Yeah, the Phoenicians
Yeah.
were
How do we know? How do we know? Because we have his coins. That's how we know.
Yeah.
All right, here's the evidence of the coins. Scholars know who the elephant is on his coins. Do you know that the elephant does actually have a name?
Okay.
You're shocked, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, the elephant's name is Surus, Surus. And the history books have given him the name Surus. And that elephant is known to have been an Indian elephant. The name Surus is coming from the word Syrian, i.e., elephants brought in from Syria, elephants of Indian origin brought in. And Hannibal is said to have had a pet elephant since his childhood, and that elephant was called Surus. That same elephant is the one that's on his coins.
Yeah.
So this is what the historians say. We know who the elephant is. We know the name of the elephant. We know the ethnicity of the elephant, Indian, but we don't know who it is on the other side of the coin.
Yeah.
Get out of here with that rubbish. Get out of here with that rubbish. If you
Yeah.
know who the elephant is, you know who the person is on the other side of that coin.
That's it.
Now, I've seen at least 4 of those coins, and those coins have all got the same African face on the other side of the coin. So if we know that the elephant is Surus, we know that the other side of the coin is Hannibal.
See, that's it. Excellent. Now, when we deal with the Moors going into Spain now, you know, people now even Diop, Sheikh Anta Diop, he's made references that he believed that the Moors came from Yemen at
Yeah,
particular times. Now we have other
yeah,
scholars who say, like we have Professor John Indra Clark, who says they came from Senegambia. Now we have some
yeah.
people. There's a man called Enfadishi. He says he came from Kush. So
Yeah.
would it be fair to say that they came from different parts, or is there a particular part that
Yes,
you say
it would be fair.
different
It
parts?
would be fair to say that. Yeah.
Okay, okay,
This is what I think. This is what I think. I think that the Black community can claim the second dynasty and the third dynasty without any controversy. You know,
yeah,
there's 4 dynasties that rule this film. The
yeah,
second one is ours, that's not controversial. The third one is ours, that's not controversial.
yeah,
With dynasty 1, the dynasty 1 is called the Umayyads. There's some controversy. And that's probably where Diop got the Yemeni theory from.
all right,
He
okay,
probably got it from. But the Yemenis are still ours. I mean, just go to Yemen. Do you see?
yeah, yeah, especially at that time as
Yeah.
well, yeah,
But the joke is, even in our time, there's a problem with Yemen. Do you see?
yeah,
And then Dynasty 4 begins as light-skinned Arab, the founder of the dynasty is called Ibn al-Ahmar, which means the red man, and red in this context means white. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
But we know that during the dynasty, the black population stepped very, very correct to make sure the right person married the right wife, and make sure the next one married the right wife. And by the time we get to the end of the dynasty, they're black.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the time of 711 AD,
Yeah.
people speak on that. Would you say the majority were Africans, black Africans that were going into Spain? And
yes, but there were Arabs as well. And the Arabs
small,
were definitely the overlords. The Arabs were definitely the overlords.
Interesting. Now, I'm happy you've mentioned about the overlords, because even though the armies were African, the majority, but the overseers, the overlords, were they ruling from, was it Damascus? Is that where the headquarters were?
Some people say that, right?
Yeah.
Some people say that, but since we know that the Arabs were mostly coming from Yemen, I can't see how Damascus could have been the center. Do you see?
Yeah, I understand that. Definitely interesting. Yeah, so the time of like when the Moors are going in, we know that they were in southern France, we know that they were in Spain, Portugal. Now, I always see depictions of Moorish type people in Germany as well. Now I'm assuming that this later periods, or actually we have what's the brother's names? Saint Maurice, is it? Is that the name?
Let me answer that.
Let
me answer that. The question of the black presence in Germany.
Yeah.
Real talk. We scholars can't explain that.
Okay.
We can't explain it. And I'll tell you why. I was invited to do a training session. I was invited to do a training session for the V&A Museum. And I showed an image, and the image is called Wild Men and Moors. Have you seen that image?
Wild Men and Moors. I've seen
Wild Men.
Not the actual one. I've seen just depictions of African-looking people in Europe, in Germany in particular.
Okay. The reason why I'm bringing it up is the depiction. It's a tapestry. And what the tapestry shows is wild men, and the wild men are Europeans.
Yeah.
And they are besieging a castle, and the castle's got black people in it.
Right. Okay. I think I've seen that depiction actually. Yeah.
Okay. Now the significance of that tapestry is that it's supposedly set in either Germany or Switzerland. What is today Germany or what is today Switzerland?
Okay.
Now here's the problem. The problem is I can't explain that.
Yeah.
If you've got black men in castles and it was Spain or Portugal, we could explain that. Oh, they're the Moors.
Yeah.
But who are they if it's Germany or Switzerland? Who are they? And whenever I've asked my elder scholars, I remember having a conversation with Dr. Kimani Nehusi. He ducked the question, and I don't blame him for ducking the question. I would have ducked that question too.
Yeah.
So the reality is we can't explain that. Now, when I presented that at the V&A Museum, someone said that no. It's actually Spain or Portugal, because Spain and Portugal was the center of textiles, and therefore the textile was made in Spain or Portugal. You see?
Yeah.
And then somebody else said, but that's impossible, and gave a counter argument why it couldn't have been Spain or Portugal, and it has to be Germany or Switzerland. And if it's Germany or Switzerland, we're back to square one. I can't explain that.
Right.
Similarly, I think you may have come across this. Have you heard of a group called the Society of the Blackheads?
Is that Sumer? Sumer. I know about the black-headed people.
It's not Sumer, no. Society of the Blackheads is one of the Eastern European countries.
Okay.
Yeah.
The time of the
or Brotherhood of the Blackheads. It's not culture. It's It's somewhere like Lithuania or one of those kind of places. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Brotherhood of Blackheads. Yeah. Present day Estonia and Latvia.
Right. So,
Brotherhood of Blackheads. You can Google this. I'm on Wikipedia. I'm looking at it right now.
yeah. Wow. Just everywhere.
Right. Now, who are they?
Hmm.
Who are they? You see, again, I can't explain any of that.
Some grey areas we end up going into at times.
Yeah. So what it is then is what I teach my students is with ancient history, we're mapping most of it out.
Yeah.
The real thing that we don't know is medieval history. How do we explain an organization calling it the Brotherhood of Blackheads? And this
Yeah.
is in present day Estonia and Latvia. What the hell's that about?
Definitely.
And as you can see from the imagery, it's clearly black people, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
But what happens is, of course, his wiki is trying to come with some explanation to try and throw you off the scent. But
Yeah.
no point. Once you call
Divert.
it blackheads, argument done.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's always diverting. Yeah. So funny enough, before you said about the Umayyads and also you had the
Mhm.
Abbasids. So with the
Yeah.
Umayyads, would you find them as when we say black people, like, because I'm aware of like the Kushites had the connection constantly going back and forth to that Middle Eastern area, Arabia. How do you find it? Because we're going back to the time of obviously the Prophet Muhammad now. I'm aware of like
Yeah.
he had, a grandmother that was from Ethiopia, Abyssinia. So
Mhm.
how would you describe the majority of the people in the Maya Empire?
The Umayyads. The
Yeah.
Umayyads, as far as I'm aware, their people actually came from Yemen.
Okay.
And
Okay.
basically, they're coming from Yemen, then we can claim them. Do you
That's
see?
right. Yeah.
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 But I do know that the Umayyads definitely had European wives, and a lot of that was going on. So some of them, such as the legendary Abdurrahman III, is said to have had blue eyes.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
so there was a lot of that going on as well. Yeah. Um, Whereas when it comes to Dynasty 2 and Dynasty 3, those were largely black dynasties that stayed black.
Right. Okay. I mean, it's
And then
just
with Dynasty
that.
4, it's lots of non-black, but people step correctly, making sure someone marries the right person and ends up black.
Yeah. See this word that get thrown around like Semitic, for example. Now we know that during
Yeah.
the time of around about you see that picture, don't get in ancient Egypt where it's got like A, B, C, D. One's showing you the African of Egypt, the African of Nubia, who looks quite identical. You've one's an Indo-European, and the other one they say is Semitic, and they show him like a pale type of Turkic Arab type person. I'm sure you've seen it. Now this Semitic, now this is only 1200 BC time of Ramses and that. So when we use the word
Mm.
Semitic, I'm aware of the origins of the so-called Afro-Asiatic, which is an African language. But
Yeah.
when we say Semitic,
Yeah.
are we dealing with a mixed people when we say Semitic?
Yeah.
When we get to the time,
Different scholars, yeah, different scholars have got very different opinions on this, right?
yeah,
Professor James Diop had the idea that the Semites were a mixture of Africans and Europeans, all right?
that's right. Yeah,
But I'm
yeah,
going to give you my because Semitic is part of the Afro-Asiatic language family. It originated in Ethiopia.
yeah,
Ethiopia is sub-Saharan Africa, and
yeah,
therefore your very first Semitic speakers would have been sub-Saharan Africans.
definitely.
Yeah. Just because some non-African looking people have grafted themselves onto the language doesn't mean that they're authentic. Does that make
Yeah, yeah.
sense?
The true Semitic people, they're not the true. Yeah, that's it. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Interesting though, because like I said, Diop, how he described it, and also Chancellor Williams, how he just
yeah,
Chancellor Williams almost like when I'm reading his book, Destructing the Black Civilization, sometimes I get mixed up, or I don't know if he's choosing to write it like that, where he'll use the word white Arabs, for example. Now, sometimes depending on who's describing the people, some people might say white Arabs, some people say no, brown Arabs. And then yes, we're aware of the different Arabs. So sometimes they get mixed up the way he's putting it at that time.
Let me explain Chancellor Williams. Yeah, with Professor Williams, his thing is if there's any admixture in the population, he's giving them away. Yeah. Whereas my thing is, no, I'm not giving anything away. You're gonna have to fight me for it.
I'm with that. I'm totally with you on that one. Definitely. Yeah. See, that's the problem with some scholars where it's better to be precise on what you're saying rather than like just, well, they've got to mix them so they're not the original indigenous Africans. I mean, we look at some Ethiopians today. You've just got back from there, and I've actually been to Ethiopia myself, but I've seen a lot of depictions of so many different look. They look like some of them look like from pure African to look like got Indian in them to Arab in them. How did you find it yourself?
Basically, two Ethiopians look less like each other than two, of argument, Kenyans.
Yeah.
And I attribute that to the closer you are to the origin of anything, the more variety you're going to see.
Yeah, of course.
And the human race is probably from there. That's why you're going to get that. And it could also be that because they've been running an empire for thousands of years, they've sucked in other populations, they've Ethiopianized them.
Yeah.
And that could also be the variety that you're seeing. Also, Ethiopia is a very high country in terms of, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So you're up in the mountains, basically. So any of that could be responsible for why two Ethiopians look less like each other than anywhere else. Yeah.
But there was a back and forth at one time with some of these countries, like whether it was Arabia, Yemen, or even India, when they used to sail across using the monsoon winds.
True. But the reason why I think the story is more complicated than that is I traveled to southwest Ethiopia, 300 kilometers away from Sudan.
Yeah.
And the population looked just as varied,
Yeah.
You see?
So, some things you can.
And,
I'm with what you're saying. It could be the fact of it's not necessarily it has to be different people. It could be like you said, it's got highlands and different climates and that around there. But I've enjoyed this discussion, and definitely one time when you've got time, where we could speak on your trip to Ethiopia, just do a whole podcast in itself regarding Ethiopia. When you get time. Anyway. Well, I want to thank you very much today, Mr. Robin Walker. This is James Diboe Discovering, dedicated to original peoples, and I look forward to doing our next episode, speaking on Ethiopia. So I want to thank you very much.
No problem.
Okay, thank you.
No, thank you.
Peace.
Have a good one.
You too. Blessings. Thank you.